Hey, thanks for being here again today, folks. It's April the 2nd, and we're picking up where we left off in the story of Gideon yesterday, and we're beginning in Judges chapter 8 today. At the end of chapter 7, we learned that Ephraim had captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and presented their heads to Gideon. And in chapter 8, we started off with a little bit of attitude problem with the Ephraimites. They were accusing Gideon of giving them the leftovers instead of inviting them to the main fight. Well, Gideon's response is priceless. Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grapes of harvest of Abiezer? English translation. Why are you upset with me? You finished off the Midianites and got the two princes at the same time, and you've done more than I've done in the whole battle, and I'm still chasing after my two guys. Well, this actually seemed to please the Ephraimites, and Gideon and his company went and continued to pursue after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. Now, along the way, they came to Succoth, and Gideon asked for provisions because he and his men were exhausted. But the leaders of Succoth mocked him and made fun of him because he hadn't caught up with the kings that he was chasing. So Gideon departs from there, but he makes them a promise that on his return, he'll whip them with a bunch of thorns. Well, the next city he comes to is Penuel, and the people treat Gideon the same way there that they did at Succoth. And Gideon tells them, hey, when I come back, I'm going to tear this tower down. Well, Gideon goes on, he does capture the two kings, and he defeats the rest of the Midianites, and he returns home. Now, on the way home, he goes by Succoth, and he captures a young man and forces him to give up the names of the 77 leaders. He brings them out of the city at the gate, and he whips them with thorns, just like he said. And at Penuel, he did tear down the tower, and he killed every man in the city. Next, it's time for Gideon to deal with these two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And he asks them a question. Where are the men who you killed at Tabor? Now, the two kings answered in kind of a snarky way, well, all you guys look the same to us. In fact, they resemble you. Wrong answer. Gideon was testing them to see if his relatives had been spared, and if so, he would have spared these kings. But instead, he orders his young son to kill them. But the young man just can't bring himself to do it, so Gideon has to do it himself. So the battles are over, the Midianites are gone, the princes and the kings, they're all dead, and the people sought to make Gideon a ruler over them. But Gideon refuses and said his son wouldn't do it either, but God would rule over him. However, he did ask for a reward of one gold earring from each man, which was about 25,000 in today's money. Now, this is where things go terribly wrong in a hurry. Instead of taking the money and using it for something honorable and useful, Gideon makes it into an ephod. Now, only the high priest was to wear the ephod in the performance of his duties, and Gideon shouldn't even have one. But this ephod becomes a snare and a thorn in his side, and it becomes an idol for all of Israel to come and whore after it. Still, the people had rest for 40 years until Gideon died. Now, Gideon had many wives, and at least one of them was a concubine, and he had many sons, and the concubine bore to him a son called Abimelech. And he was raised among his mother's people in Shechem, presumably because she was more of a servant than a wife, which made Abimelech illegitimate. Now, he stirred up the people in Shechem, and he convinced them that it would be a lot better off for them if they were ruled by one son of Gideon rather than 70 sons of Gideon. And they agreed with him, and they helped him hire a group of thugs to go off and kill his brothers, all except one, Jotham, the youngest, who had hidden himself. Now, after the slaughter and the removal of all the challengers, Abimelech was made king of Shechem by the city officials and by the city of Beth Millo. Now, this location of these two cities is between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, the mountains of blessing and cursing we saw from Deuteronomy 27. You can go back to the video on March 19th if you want to know more about this area. Jotham is on Mount Gerizim and close enough to see what's happening in the town below, and he calls out from Mount Gerizim to the people, and he tells them a parable about trees seeking for a ruler over them. They ask the olive tree to rule, but he says he has too much involved in the oil and things that he's doing to serve God and man, and he declines to rule. The second is the fig tree, And they ask him to rule, but he refuses because he has the sweetest fruit and a great purpose to fulfill already. The third tree they ask is the grapevine, but he refuses also because his wine is already special to both God and man, so he's not interested. In fact, none of these trees thought that being ruler was better than what they would be giving up. But the bramble, he says, hey, I'll take the job. Everyone can find shade under me. Okay, just a brief side note. We have brambles here in Oklahoma. We call them briars. Left uncontrolled, they'll grow up around a tree or in a field until they choke at everything that exists. When I'm hunting, I try to avoid these things as much as possible because it's like taking a stroll through barbed wire. You come out all cut up and bleeding all over the place if you try to fight through these things. Well, this is a picture of what Jotham was painting for Shechem and Beth Milo about the rule of Abimelech and what he would be like. The last warning that he gives them before he departs is that if they've chosen poorly by making Abimelech their ruler, fire would come out and destroy the leaders with fire and destroy Abimelech also. Well, Abimelech rules Israel for about 3 years, and then they start having trouble because God sends a spirit to divide them, and they don't get along. And an outsider moves into Shechem, and he starts stirring up trouble. His name was Gaal, which oddly enough means loathing or contempt. How fitting for this story. One day, he's overheard talking about Abimelech and implying that he needs to go. And of course, Abimelech finds out. And Abimelech brings his forces against Gaal and the people of Shechem and ends up killing Gaal and chasing the leaders up inside the city tower. Well, Abimelech burns them alive inside the tower, thus the first part of Jotham's prophecy coming true. Abimelech's thirst for vengeance had not been slaked, so he attacked the city of Thebez and forced everyone inside of their tower as well. Now, if you're keeping count, that's 3 towers in this section of scripture, so it should probably be called Abimelech and the 3 Towers, a lost tale from Tolkien. Anyway, they prepared to fire the tower just as they'd done before, and a certain woman tossed a millstone down on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. However, it didn't seem to kill him right off because he begs his armor bearer to finish him off so that he won't be known or remembered for having been killed by a woman. Too late. God already recorded it for all time. Well, with the bad actors all dead now, and everyone went home. For me, this is yet another example of what happens when we try to do things our way. Gideon had done so well in the campaign, but he messed up by making an idol out of the ephod. We can have good intentions and think that we're doing what is right, but in the end, without God leading us and ruling over us, we'll reap chaos and despair. Sorry this one ended on such a downer note, but I hope you'll come back tomorrow and join us again on Set Sail. Maybe we'll have a little more encouraging story. See you tomorrow, friends.